and this faith journey has produced is peace and joy. And so, God, we enter your gates today with thanksgiving. We are thanking you that we are growing up in faith. We are thanking you that we are becoming and beholding and becoming change for the time we have spent in your presence. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I'm so happy. You guys, it has taken a long time. Is it my first live? No, this is my first live of the year. I was live the last day of the year because that was a Friday. And then I haven't been back and I've been resting, right? And you're like, girl, resting. And I'm like, yes, resting. And I have something to share with you because as you observe, it's Tuesday. And if you know your girl is live on Wednesdays and Fridays, usually. And then sometimes you'll catch me on a Monday. But God did something different and I'm gonna go with it. So, without much further ado, let me introduce myself to you. Hi, my name is Lenore Reynolds Jones. It is my privilege and my pleasure to be a proprietress of this wonderful kingdom enterprise called Legacy Builders, where we equip, where we add value to, where we help. That's right, I help individuals and couples gain necessary tools and skills so that they can walk in identity, know their purpose, and have a successful and satisfying relationship. And you know what that all leads to? A lasting legacy. So that's who I am. That is why I am here. And today, I am going to share with you what I titled it was Winning in the Dark. And you're like, sis, what? That is an interesting title. I thought so. I am always surprised with what God comes up with when it's time for me to type in the comment box or in the title box. And then it said an impromptu discussion about overcoming fear. Now, you're like, sis, I don't know. I don't have any idea what you're talking about. Well, just go with me today. Before you go with me, I want to ask you to just do me a few favors. Number one, I would love for you to like this broadcast wherever you're watching it. Number two, I would love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow me on all social media. And number three, I would love, love, love if you would share it. So that's like, that's follow or subscribe, and that's share. Those are the three things that I am asking, and my promise is that I will continue to provide what I hope is encouraging content, enriching content, and content that always, always, always points you back to Jesus, because that is why I am here. That's why it's a kingdom enterprise. The Bible encourages us to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things, like houses and cars and all these things, they are added in the pursuit of the kingdom. And so I am going to share with you what God said to me, and then I will quickly get out of your way. So here's what happened. I am reading the story of Gideon, and I say reading, and it's been about 2 or so weeks. I honestly took a break over the holidays and just, really just like chilled, like generally, and because it was getting to the place where even my worship felt routine. You get up, you read a devotion. Sometimes the devotions are good, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you don't feel like reading it, but you're like, God, I'm going to read because they said you had to. Sometimes you don't even read, or you go and you do something like I did, which is you'll read the Bible directly. And sometimes you feel like God done spoke 57 paragraphs from that little passage that you read. And other times you read the passage and you're like, I don't even know what you said. Anyway, so I decided to just take a break. So I wasn't reading the devotions. I definitely still prayed, but I wasn't reading a devotion. I wasn't necessarily reading my Bible the greatest. I was just there. And then That turned into the new year coming, and I'm still just and I've called it resting, right? Because I'm going to be honest, I've been resting. And it's been an intentional thing on my part, because if you've been tracking for me over the last little while, you know God has done some amazing things in my life. Number one, we got a house. Like, for many years, that house was a 7-year journey, particularly in the last 5 after we sold our house. We bought a house, guys, and it is amazing. And I am so happy. Like, my husband and I still talk about the fact that, we wake up in our house, excuse me, and we're like, wait, this is ours. And every time I walk around this house, I get this sense of, man, this is what God thought of me. You'll get that more in a second as we go through this devotion. But we got a house. I don't know if some of you know, but right after, about less than 5 days after we bought the house, we got a car. We needed another car, and we went in there, and wouldn't you know, those people gave us this beautiful, nice red car. So got a new car. And then the day that we found out we were under contract, I also, a dream that I had pretty much walked away from, law school. A couple of years ago, God told me to go to law school. I got up, took the LSAT prep, applied to law schools, and I was rejected by 3, not 1, not twice, 3 times. I was unable to get into law school. And I was like, clearly, God, I heard you wrong. Clearly, I heard you wrong. And so I walked away from it, and then getting ready to go to grad school instead, because again, I can't get into law school. In a random conversation with my sister, I go and I find an online law school. And when I say online, I mean everything happens online. Many of the law school programs, or particularly the JD programs, because you can get master's degree education in law school, but it's generally not a JD. And so when we were looking at JD programs, though, even though they say online, there's 1 weekend a month that they want you to come to their campus, wherever that is. And I had even accepted that I would have to do that, but never got in. Wouldn't you know, now I get into a program that is 100% online, and there is no reason for me to ever go to their campus. It is 100% online, prepares me to take the bar, and just go to law school. And that program, hear me, the program didn't exist 6 months ago. So when I got up in obedience 3 years ago and did all this stuff, or 5 years ago and did all of this stuff, and all my efforts, it was needed then to prepare me for what God would release now. So just because you heard the word then and you got up in obedience then, didn't mean the fulfillment would come then. It is that idea that you have to trust in the God of the promise and not the promise itself. And I realized along the way, like, because yes, God has had me on this faith journey, but the journey was more about purifying and increasing the quality of my faith, and making sure that my faith was in the right vessel, than it was so much increasing my faith. Because think about money. We understand that fear is counterfeit faith, because you're going to believe in something. But so my faith wasn't counterfeit, but there are, you can do more with a $20 bill than you can with $1. And God has given us all a measure of faith. But what if God gave us all $20 and we're treating it like $1? Because you treat people, or we treat it like pennies. Because some people, we see pennies all the time. Because if you lose a penny, you don't look for it. If like you're going and you drop some coins, you don't immediately stop all the time. But God was trying to get us to understand the quality of the faith that he had given us. Anyway, so that journey eventually manifested just this year. And now, as I sit here today on Tuesday, I am actually a 1L, a first-year law student. Never thought. Excuse me. Never thought that would be my story. So when I tell you God has been doing some amazing things, I mean absolutely amazing things in my life. which is why coming over to the top of the year, I was just like, I need to rest. This is just too much. Like, and so one of the last lives I did, we were talking about this idea that harvest is the most labor intensive top part of, there's a window right here, guys, and I thought I saw movement. But harvest is the most labor intensive part of the growth process, where, like, yes, you can plant, you can do all kinds of things, but you need people to harvest. And so I was like, I'm in my harvest season, but God has given me rest. And I was resting. So imagine my surprise now when in the middle of my resting, I noticed that things just seem to be going. There's this squeaky, what's the squeaky wheel gets the most oil. So there's just little squeak in this thing. And I'm just like, and it gets bigger and bigger. And it's not like stuff is going backwards. We are still very much in our home. We drive the new car. I'm getting emails from the law school. My professors, like, stuff is moving along. But there's just other things that are adding. And those things, one of the lessons I've learned was to let God. So there were some very key moments, and I don't think I've ever actually told the entire story of how we got this house, but there were some very key moments where, like, I had to choose to sit down, do nothing, and pray to God and believe that that was enough, because it was God who was going to do it. And so all of this happens to the person who now into the new year comes, and we have this squeak that is getting louder, this pattern that I am noticing. And I'm like, God, I don't know. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to rest, because what I know is that you are the one who's in charge. And so today I pick up my Bible again. And again, I'm reading my devotion. And we are in the book of Judges, chapter 6 and 7. Why those two chapters? Because those are the story of Gideon. And I am going to tell you the story of Gideon, probably in a way you've never heard. Because if you are even remotely familiar with the Bible, you know two things about Gideon. One, he's the dude with the fleeces. And two, you also know that he's the dude with the 300. Right? And it varies depending on your knowledge. But none of those things that you know about him are the things that I want to focus on. You hear me? We're going to talk about the 300, kind of. We're going to talk about the fleeces, kind of, but they're not the focus. Because what I learned through my devotion, and particularly through God's revelation today, is that Gideon's story is a story of winning in the dark. And you're like, sis, what? Yes. So Judges chapter 6, verse 1, we open it up and we find who? Gideon. Where do we find Gideon? Threshing wheat in a wine press. You're like, I don't understand. Why is that a big deal? Well, the chapter actually opens talking about the Midianites who would come, and they would come at harvest time, and they would take all the crops from the children of Israel, and they had oppressed them, and they were stealing all their stuff. And so the children of Israel, they cried out to God, and God's like, okay, I'm going to deliver you from the Midianites. Okay. And so that is where we find Gideon. What is interesting to note is that Gideon is from the smallest tribe and the smallest family in the tribe. And so it's not like Gideon had a bunch of wheat or he was doing a bunch of things. He wasn't doing anything to draw attention. But Gideon was so afraid of the mere chance, mere possibility that this could go wrong, that he was doing the work in the wrong place, even though it would cause him more work, on the possibility that he wouldn't meet opposition. So have you ever been so afraid of opposition that you are doing the work, but you're doing it in the wrong place and in the wrong posture, even though it's going to cause you more work. Because let's be clear, a wine press is a place where you tread grapes to make wine. They step on it. Back in the day, it was this big vat, and they would step on it and they would press all the juice out, and then they had to separate, the pulp and keep the juice. But you have to keep that clean. Wheat doesn't belong in a wine press. What do you have that doesn't belong where it is, but you're doing it here? Why? Because you are so afraid of the opposition. So here's our boy Gideon, so afraid that he's doing this thing and doing himself, his family, everybody a disservice. And he comes in, and into this story of abject fear, here comes God. And what does God do? God says, and I love God, truly, because God introduces to him and he says, I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the Israelites. I brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I've delivered you from all your oppressors, or whatever. And God goes and tells him, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. So despite this God finding Gideon in a place that spoke entirely to his fear, God doesn't address him as he sees himself. God doesn't address him as, I believe, the rest of the people around him, because again, he was from the smallest tribe and his family was the least. God doesn't address him as that. God addresses him as who he sees him as. And who God saw was this mighty warrior. And we know that dude don't see himself like that, because in response, Gideon goes, pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this stuff happened to us? So not only does Gideon not see himself clearly, he doesn't see God either. He's like, nah, God left us a while back. God is talking to Gideon. God tells Gideon how he been with him the whole time. God tells Gideon who he is, despite what his fear is causing him to do. And Gideon's response is like, well, I'm not him, and God ain't here. So God then says, and so God is giving Gideon is like, and God is telling Gideon this, and God and Gideon have a back and forth going, because God tells Gideon who he is. He's like, nope. God says, I'm with you. Gideon's like, nope. Then God says, I've chosen you to deliver Israel. Gideon's like, do you forget who I told you I was? Smallest tribe, smallest family in the tribe. Excuse me. My clan is the weakest in all of Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Like, clearly, everything God said, Gideon had a rebuttal. And God's response to all of that was, I will be with you, and I will strike down the Midianites, leaving none alive. Gideon is like, okay, I hear you. If I found favor in your eyes, I'm going to go cook you some food. Stick around for me to cook this food, and when we come back, I'm gonna bring this offering before you. This really is an attempt to delay. So have you been in the situation? Just track with me. Again, we're talking about winning in the dark. So maybe you aren't the person who is threshing wheat in the wine press. You aren't the person who is so overcome with fear that you're doing things in places that they should not be done, knowing full well it's going to cause you extra work. Maybe you're not the person who has this bad image of yourself and of God, so much so that when God himself enters his situation, tells you who you are and tells you who he is, you rebut God and be like, nah, God, that's not true. Maybe you're not that person, but maybe you're the person who God has come to you, told you who you are, told you what he's called you to do, and shown you the future, and you try to delay the inevitable. So you tell God, wait, I'm gonna go prepare some food. And it's not a bad thing to have bring this offering and set it before you, but you're only doing the offering in an attempt to delay, because what? You still don't believe. And so God humors him. God humors him. God says, all right, let's do this. So he lets him prepare the thing. He creates the food. He eats it. He sets it on the altar. Guys, and here is what God did. God told him, set up the altar, set the food on the altar. And God sends a fire to consume the food, the altar, and then the dude disappears. Y'all, Gideon lost his mind because God waited him out. God let him do this, and then God proved without question that not only is he God, that he is here with you now. And in response to that proof, Gideon lost his mind. Dude had a panic attack, an anxiety attack, everything. And here's what, and it revealed further what we had already understood, that Gideon, this God, Gideon don't know God the way God was coming to introduce himself. Because his response is, why did Gideon lose his mind? Because he was like, I'm about to die. Because in the Bible, they talk about this vengeful, vindictive, mean dictator God. And when people see him face to face, he strikes them down. So I just watched, I was in the presence of God, and then I asked him to wait for me. And then I put my sacrifice up there. That's God. So he got a clear revelation. He got confirmation that this was God, and dude lost his mind because he was like, oh, I'm about to die. Maybe that's you, that you have gotten an absolute clear revelation of God, and you are convinced now that I'm about to die because the situation I find myself in, the God that I have learned about in my former years or in my formative years, he's about to kill me. And God does it again. God comes back around, and God tells Gideon, no, I'm not going to kill you, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to break down the altars of Baal. And guys, I'm going to pick it up a little more because I don't want to stay here. But God's like, I want you to break down. Now that you know who I am, now that you know that I'm here, now that I'm telling you I'm not here to kill you, I'm here to give you purpose. I'm here because I have a plan for you and for your life. I'm here because I have something that I want you to accomplish. Now that we are here and we understood, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and I want you to break down the altar of Baal. And because at this point, Gideon can no longer question, one, that it is God, two, that God is speaking to him, three, that God has a clear plan for him. He goes, and I give him props. He does it. He goes, he tears down. But here's how we know that fear was still Gideon's bestie. He does it at night when nobody can see him. At least that's what he thought. And so the next morning when everybody wakes up now and they see their altar and their statue on the ground, everybody is up in arms, and they like, who broke Baal, which is their God, their idol. And they're like, oh, it was Gideon, so-and-so's son. But where is Gideon? Gideon is hiding. So have you, I'm not even going to do the have yous, or were you the person who did what God told you to do and then went into hiding because you didn't want nobody to know that you had done what God told you? But we ain't gonna touch that. Gideon is hiding. And so Gideon's dad is the one who is like, let me stick up for my son. Let me tell everybody that my son did it. But here's the reality of it. Gideon was fighting against what? A God. And so Gideon's father merely put it into perspective. Maybe you're fighting against something that everybody else holds their, their God, lowercase g. And so Gideon's dad had to really just, here's how he checked him. He was like, yo, if this is really a God, why couldn't he stop Gideon from breaking down his statue and his altar? Like, he's God. He's supposed to be powerful. If he's powerful, let him fight for himself. And they were like, you know what? You got a point. And you know what? From that moment, you know what they did? They changed Gideon's name to a name that means he will contend with God. Mind you, a couple verses ago, we done told you that God told Gideon he was a mighty warrior. Now, the people around him are like, yo, he fights with gods. Sound like a mighty warrior to me. And that one action they believe. But where is Gideon while they're getting this revelation? He's hiding and letting his dad fight for him. Anyway, so God and Gideon have a couple more conversations, and I am wrapping up. God and Gideon have a couple more conversations where God continues to show Gideon who God is and what he wants to do. And so God finally gets Gideon to the place where he's like, all right, Gideon, call the army. Gideon goes, he blows the trumpet, he sets up the thing, the army responds. 32,000 dudes come to fight. Maybe it's because they heard the story of Gideon and the statue of Baal. Maybe they're just frustrated with the Midianites. Whatever you want to say, what the reality is that 32,000 people, 32,000 men respond to the call to fight. And so Gideon now has a large army to go fight the Midianites at God's command. Guys, I'm like, okay, that's good. So let's go fight. That was not Gideon's response. It is into this place where Gideon has already, and God told Gideon who he was. God has shown Gideon through his neighborhood who Gideon was. God has shown Gideon his power through the whole disappearing act situation. God has confirmed for Gideon that he is talking to him. God has brought this large army together, and it is into that scenario that Gideon lays down a fleece. So here's our first big takeaway. I suggest to you, and I know for me, that we've been using fleeces wrong. You're like, wait, sis, wait. Because here's the thing. The fleeces Gideon laid out were not predictions of outcomes. And you can go look in the text. Go argue with me in the comments if you want to, because that means you've had to have watched this to do that. Or argue with me in the comments now as you're watching live. But the fleeces were not to predict an outcome. Gideon didn't lay this fleece before God and be like, are we gonna win? Gideon wasn't one asking, so Gideon didn't lay out a fleece, will I get the job? Gideon didn't lay out a fleece, is this my husband? No, Gideon's fleece was about, God, if you're gonna use me as you promised, prove that you are picking me and that you're as powerful as you say you are, and bend nature to prove your power. So Gideon's fleece was about confirmation of his identity and proof of God's power. His identity. If you are laying out fleeces for anything other than those two reasons, could it be the reason you're having an issue is that God ain't gonna answer that? Could it be the question's wrong? Again, when Gideon laid out his fleeces, it was, are you going to use me to keep your promise and deliver us? And are you strong? If you are strong enough to bend nature, then you're definitely strong enough to defeat the Midianites. He wasn't trying to predict the outcome of the fight. He wasn't trying to, change the situation. He wasn't trying to change the plan. He wasn't saying, well, God, the problem. No. And so God did exactly what Gideon asked. God confirmed that, yes, Gideon, I, God, who is all powerful, chose you, and I'm going to fight for you. And he said it twice. And he bent nature twice. And that produced something in Gideon. So here's the next thing, is that if by chance you have laid out a fleece before God, if you got an answer, what did it produce? You're like, what? Because God ain't out here answering questions just for answering questions' sake. Again, and so see point one, where I talk about what's the question you're asking. Because God answered the questions that produced faith in Gideon. So much so, and how do we know it produced faith in Gideon? So fleeces then are used to answer questions that will produce faith in yourself, in your identity, and in God. Because now, and we know that because on the other side of this fleece story is God telling Gideon, you got too many people. And God does what we would think is absolutely crazy. God reduces Gideon's army by 99%. And you're like, sis, what? Yes, that's what it says. The 300, that's 1%. 300 is 1% of 30,000. And Gideon had 32,000 people show up and were ready to fight. And through a series of events where God spoke to him, God decreased his army 99%. But that fleece was so effective. The faith that he developed over those experiences and from having that fleece, it was so good that the reduction of 99% did not faze him. How do we know it didn't faze him? Because when the time for the battle came, and this is we at the end now because it's the time for the battle. When the time for the battle came, it says in chapter 7 that God woke Gideon up in the middle of the night. After the thing had been reduced by 99%, we don't find Gideon laying out another fleece. We don't find Gideon pacing back and forth in the camp. We don't find Gideon, praying and fasting, asking God to do. No. We find God and Gideon in chapter 7 and verse. And it's chapter 7 and verse 9. During the night, the Lord said to Gideon, oh no, this is. God woke up Gideon. He told him, if you were afraid, go down and listen to what they're saying. But here's the thing. He was resting. And God, because God knows him, God addresses his fear before. So what I'm here to tell you is the topic is winning in the dark. You win in the dark in several ways. Number one, you win in the dark when you trust God and the revelation of himself that he gives you. God will tell you not just who he is, but who you are. And your job is to believe him. Number two, you lay out fleeces to confirm the things that God has said about you to you about your legacy, about your purpose, but you can also lay them out to confirm who God is, and his power. Number 3, God cares about your feelings, your emotions. And so God will address your fears and put you in a position to win. That position, though, will probably, most likely, not look anything like what you thought. Not only did God reduce the size of the army to 1%, when God gave Gideon the battle strategy, it was in the dark. Why would you, Lenore, did God give Gideon this battle strategy in the dark? I'm going to give it for 2 reasons why we win in the dark. 1, because God didn't want Gideon to see the size of the army that he was up against. And 2, God's strategy for the dark is one that will allow God to fight for you, and you know he's fighting for you. You're like, what, sis? Think about it. In the dark, Gideon couldn't see the size of the army, but the army also couldn't see the number of people that Gideon was fighting against, that were fighting against them. The dark is key. The dark is a key part of your winning strategy. Number 2, when the strategy was given, the strategy to fight was predicated on the dark. As in, take these clay pots, these cameras, and these things to break the clay pots, go down, surround them. And what was the fight strategy? I call it Jericho 2.0 because it's crash the clay pots, hold up your light, and what? Shout. Stand and shout, guys. They didn't actually have to fight. When we read the verse, it says these people saw that they were surrounded by fire and by these things, and God caused them to fight against themselves. So the dark confirms that God is going to do the fighting, and the dark protects you from allowing fear to creep in. And so the only way you win in the dark is by being secure in the God who is fighting for you, and being secure in who God says you are. And so today, as you go throughout your day, I want to encourage you, spend some time working on who you are, on who God has told you to you are what he has called you to do. Ask God to tell you, ask him to confirm it. Then ask God to show himself to you. And when he does, believe him. And last but certainly not least, when he tells you to go fight, even if it's dark, go into the darkness knowing that because of who you are and who your God is, your victory is assured. I hope you had a wonderful time with me. I thank you so much for joining me. Now, if you have some trouble with number one being this idea of, God, who am I? Why am I here? Well, I would love to work with you on that. I have several classes. I have services that can help point you in the direction of figuring out who God has said you are and why you are here. To learn more, scroll your fingers across the keyboard and go over to www.legacybuilders.com/services, or even our shop. Excuse me, and you will find there some products and some services that can help you. In this moment, though, if you are looking for a deeper relationship with God, I want to tell you that's actually even easier. That just means that you open your heart and you repeat after me these words: God, I am here and I am looking for you. Reveal yourself to me. Save me from my sin. I believe in you. Help me in the areas I am weak. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much, so much, so much for joining me. I am absolutely happy to have been with you today. And as I always say, I pray that your latter, as in the latter half of your day, is greater than the beginning. Bye-bye. What I trust and this faith journey has produced is peace and joy. And so, God, we enter your gates today with thanksgiving. We are thanking you that we are growing up in faith. We are thanking you that we are becoming and beholding and becoming changed for the time we have spent in your presence.